So I walked down the aisle, stood in front of the boss, and I held out my hand. He took a knife, cut my finger. Some blood dropped on the floor. This is a blood oath. And then I cupped my hands. He took a picture of a Catholic saint, put it in my hands, and lit it aflame. And it burned
Wow.
quickly. It was merely symbolic. It didn't hurt. And he said, "Tonight, Michael Franzese, you are born again into a new life, into Cosa Nostra. Violate what you know about this life, betray your brothers, and you will die and burn in hell like the saint is burning in your hands. Do you accept?" "Yes, I do." And at that point, you're a made man.
Welcome to episode 163 of the Mikhaila Peterson podcast. I'm Mikhaila Peterson. In this episode, I spoke with Michael Franzese. Michael's a former mobster and leading member of the Colombo Crime Family. After being part of the mob in a very serious way for more than 20 years, he decided to completely change his life, in a large part because of Christianity. His story is pretty amazing. Some people have lives that sound like made-up stories. It's a crazy world out there. I was very excited to speak to him. I have been for a while. He's the author of a number of books like Mafia, Democracy, which we discussed, and he works as a public speaker with the goal of steering people away from participating in organized crime. Michael and I discussed the ritual of becoming a made member in the mob, Michael's wife bringing him into Christianity, the growing mistrust of government today, the Acts of the Apostles and Jesus, and more. Before we get started, this episode of the podcast is sponsored by Rabbit Air. You can see it glowing in the background right there. There it is. For people who suffer from them, living with allergies can range from mild to miserable. And in rare cases, like mine, allergies can make your face look like you weigh 50 pounds more than you do. Thankfully, Rabbit Air's HEPA air purifiers filter out 99.97% of the allergens and pollutants from the air. Since it's the beginning of the fall allergy season, it's the perfect time to get one for your home office space or your bedroom or your kids' bedrooms or your living room or your kitchen. A lot of people suffer from allergies without realizing it. So if you're someone who wakes up with a stuffy nose or you're congested, allergies can look like a cold as well. So if you're someone who gets a cold and then gets bronchitis, it could be because of allergies. Given we breathe in nearly 2,000 gallons of air, cleaning the air in your house can really reduce immune responses to allergens. They've really helped me, and I like how they sound and look. You can get your Rabbit Air air purifier today by going to rabbitair.com to see their models or call them 24/7 to speak to a Rabbit Air consultant. That's rabbitair.com. I hope you enjoy this episode. How have you been? Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure. I've been good. I've been busy. Things have recovered quite a bit since we had that downtime in the pandemic, but everything's been good.
Before we get started, for anyone who doesn't know who you are, do you think you could give a brief background about who you are, and we'll get into this, what you've done and what you currently do?
Sure. Michael Franzese grew up in New York. My dad was the underboss of the Colombo family, one of the 5 New York Mafia Cosa Nostra families. So I grew up in that environment. He was a very, very high profile figure. He was kind of like the John Gotti of his day in terms of media attention, law enforcement attention. So I grew up around that. My dad was indicted several times, went to trial 4 times, eventually was convicted on a major racketeering case, and went to prison for 50 years. And I was a pre-med student in Hofstra University at the time of his incarceration. And Joe Colombo, who was the boss of my family back then, kind of took me under his wing. And through a series of events, I decided to leave school and try to help my dad get out of prison. And as a result, my dad proposed me for membership in that life. I became a made member of that life, took the oath in 1975, and spent about 20 years in that life, first as a soldier, which is the initial rank when you come into the life, and then as a captain, capo regime. And I was a major target of law enforcement myself, mainly because of my dad's name. It started that way, but I was arrested 18 times. I was indicted 7 times. I had 2 federal racketeering cases, one brought on by Rudy Giuliani. Went to trial 5 times, was acquitted in 5 cases, but then took a 10-year plea for a 10-year prison sentence and a $15 million restitution. And just before that, I met a young woman who's now my wife of 37 years. And basically, it was because of meeting her and her faith that, caused me to try to walk away from that life. And that's what I did back in 1995 after serving my prison sentence. And since then, I've been a speaker, an author, been involved in the film industry to some degree. And here I am, some 20 odd years, be alive and free and, living a fairly normal life. So that's the basic thumbnail sketch.
Okay, this is great. You've had such an interesting life. Is it? Have you had the experience going through these experiences in your life that it's surreal, or because you grew up in this, did it kind of feel normal?
Yeah, early on it was normal for me because I don't remember anything but my dad in that way from the time I was, able to start to realize what life was all about. So, growing up like that was normal. Growing up for me, hating the police, hating law enforcement, hating the government was normal because I viewed them as enemies to my family. I always heard chatter in the house and how bad, law enforcement could be. I loved and idolized my dad. So anybody that was, trying to hurt him became my enemy. So it was normal, growing up. I mean, I looked at it that way.
Okay, that makes sense. What about stress wise? I mean, being indicted all the time and having cops there or after you constantly, were you guys in a kind of hyper stressed position?
Mikhaila, it's funny you asked that. I went to, about a year ago, I went to the doctor and I had a little bit of a condition that on your face where you start to lose your beard just a little bit in spots. And they say normally it's caused by stress. So the doctor said to me, "Do you have a lot of stress?" I don't know. I mean, I don't know what stress is. I just lived this way my whole life, with watching out and being careful and trying not to make any mistakes. So it was just such a normal part of my life. I don't think that I viewed it any differently, even till now. I mean, things that are major to some other people are nothing to me because of my history in that regard. So, but in that life, it's very difficult to navigate the life on its own. But when you have that additional problem of law enforcement constantly on you, like they were with me, it becomes that much more difficult. So I was always kind of walking a tightrope, my whole 20 years in that life.
Yeah, wow. And I looked up how old you were before the podcast. Are you 71?
I am.
Okay, because you don't look like you've been stressed out for your whole life. I was just in the other room with my
Well,
husband, and he was like, he's 71? I was like, no, you look good.
well, I can tell you this. My dad passed away at 103. My dad
Okay.
was one of six, was one of 19. Yeah, he was one of 19 into their late 80s, 90s. He outlived them all. But so we have some good genes in the family. But, I mean, I don't feel any different than I felt 30, 40 years ago. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just fortunate in that regard. And, I try to keep myself in good shape. And it's a number.
Maybe
That's
it's
it.
the high stress life was doing something for you, living that long.
Yeah,
Wow,
it might
that's
have worked in reverse.
yeah, that's funny. Okay, I do want to get into your wife's faith and your faith at some point in this episode because I think last time we spoke, I talked a little bit about my experience because I grew up, with my dad teaching me the biblical stories and the psychological significance, but I didn't believe in God, that's for sure. I wanted to, but I didn't. So you said you met your wife and it was kind of her faith that changed your life. Can you get into that a little bit?
Yeah, my wife was a devout Christian when I met her, but she was 20 years old. And it had an impact on me in that, not that I was buying into it. I grew up Catholic, but for me, Catholic school, Catholicism was like a subject in school. I went to Catholic school. And so I wasn't really engaged in my faith. I understood that I had to practice the religion, but I wasn't engaged in my faith. I did believe in God, but that was about it. So when I met my wife and I saw how devout she was, and then take that a step further, meeting her mother, my mother-in-law, all about Jesus. I mean, she was the most godly woman I ever met in my life. Very simple woman, and had a beautiful way of expressing her faith. She was very, outgoing about it. But I respected their belief. It wasn't that I was buying into it. I respected their belief. And it was really at that point that I realized, they didn't really know who I was. They grew up out here in California, where I am now, in Anaheim. And I'm from New York. So they didn't really know much about me or the mafia or anything like that. But it was saying to myself, these two women, they're a direct contradiction to everything I'm about. And when they really know who I am, how is this going to work out? It's not going to work out. So wanting to have her in my life was what made me interested in learning about my faith. So that's how she influenced me. But really, what happened, when I went to prison the second time, I was out. I did 5 years. I was out on parole for 13 months, and then they violated my parole. And it's a whole story behind that. The government was upset with me because I wasn't cooperating, and they put me in solitary. And
Ooh.
I was in solitary for 29 months and 7 days. Yeah, it was a long stretch, Mikhaila. And through that experience, that we were not meant to be solo creatures. We were
Wow.
meant to be social.
Ooh.
And a lot of guys at night, yeah, when those lights went out, man, you heard a lot of moaning and groaning. A lot of people do not do well, and I understand. But it was really during that experience that I grew my faith, because I dove into my Bible. If you see my prison Bible, there's more of my notes on there than there is scripture. And I had my wife send me several hundred books on all different faiths, because I really was in a search for the truth, because I thought I would never come out of prison. The government had told me that I'm going to die in jail, that I'll never see the light of day again. So I was worried about eternity. Is this real?
Yeah.
Where am I going to end up? And so that's what really motivated me to learn about my faith. And, in all due respect to everybody else, I came out of there believing 100% in Christianity through my research. That's it wasn't anything surreal. I didn't get visited by God in the cell. There was no moments like supernatural moments for me. It was just my research, and then the experience that I've had ever since, not only in my life but and saw what God has done in their life. So that's how this came about with me.
Wow. I can't imagine solitary confinement like that for that period of time. Yeah, that's
It was
intense.
hard, Michaela. I'm so totally against that for young people that are in prison. Unless they're a danger to others and a danger to themselves. It's just it's cruel and unusual. There's no question about it.
Yeah, it's surprising that that's still used, really, because that seems like it's like akin to torture. So, you're not supposed to torture people, so it's strange that that's used. Okay.
Well, listen, the prison system,
Yeah.
they do what they feel they need to do.
You mentioned something that I'm not familiar with when you were describing, like when I first asked you who you were and what it is you do. You said something, you became a made member. Can you describe what a made member is?
Made members when you take an oath and you officially become a member of that life, and it is a very solemn ceremony. And leading up to that, you have to prove your worth or prove your value and prove that you have the privilege, in their view, the honor to become a member. And when that happens, it happens in a very solemn ceremony. And, I underwent that ceremony on Halloween night in 1975 and basically took an oath. And I can describe it for you. I mean, there was 6 of us that took the oath that night, and we walked into a room. It was midnight. We walked into a room individually. The boss of the family was seated at like the head of a horseshoe configuration, and the underboss and the consigliere, which are 2 official positions, were to his left and right. And then all the other captains, consiglieres, were capo regimes were alongside of them. So I walked down the aisle, stood in front of the boss, and I held out my hand. He took a knife, cut my finger. Some blood dropped on the floor. This is a blood oath. And then I cupped my hands. He took a picture of a Catholic saint, put it in my hands, and lit it aflame. And it burned quickly. It
Wow.
was, yeah, it was merely symbolic. It didn't hurt. And he said, "Tonight, Michael Franzese, you are born again into a new life, into Cosa Nostra. Violate what you know about this life, betray your brothers, and you will die and burn in hell like the saint is burning in your hands. Do you accept?" "Yes, I do." And at that point, you're a made man.
Wow. Okay. That's slightly different than any initiation ceremonies I've heard that a normal person goes through. Wow, that's quite
Yes,
movie
it's
like.
quite abnormal. Well, it
Wow.
is, and they wanted you to understand the seriousness of what you were getting involved in. So it's very solemn, and it's taken very seriously. The mob life of Cosa Nostra, it's not, people think it's a business. It's not a business. It's a way of life. It's a whole mind subculture from everything else that exists. So you got to be in it, body, mind, and soul, or you don't survive in that life. And so the fact that I was able to walk away is really, it doesn't often happen, unless people become informants and cooperate with the government and go into a witness protection program. It's very hard to get away from that life.
Yeah, so how did you manage to do that?
Well, for me, there's two reasons for that. The overall reason is I believe God had a different plan and a purpose for my life, and that's certainly played out over the past 20 some odd years. Um, but the practical reason for that is, God never throws us into the fire without preparation. And I knew that life extremely well. So when I walked away, I knew what I would face. One of the horrors of that life, Mikhaila, and again, I hate to be offensive, but I'm just being honest, is that you make a mistake, your best friend walks you into a room and you don't walk out again. And, unfortunately, through my 20 years, I know people that have experienced that. And so when I walked away, I said, okay, they're not walking me into a room. They're going to have to come and get me. So I moved out to California. It's one thing to walk somebody in the people out, cross country to try to hurt you and then get away with it. I was extremely disciplined in that I changed my whole lifestyle. I didn't go into any nightclubs where people know who I am, and I walk out in a parking lot and I'm in trouble. I didn't walk my dog every morning at 7 a.m. I didn't go to the same restaurant every Tuesday. I didn't create patterns in my life. So if people were looking for me, they'd know where to find me. I was very discreet in that regard early on. And, long story short, and they did put a contract on my life, and I did have trouble in that regard. And I had one or two close calls. But bottom line is, I just outlasted everybody. I mean, everybody I know is either dead or in prison for the rest of their life. And, at the end of the day, I didn't put people in prison. I didn't turn against them in that way. I just left. So, over a period of years, people said, we'll leave him alone. He didn't hurt anybody. And that was the end of that. So I think God
Wow.
protected me in all of this. I have to believe that.
Yeah, well, sounds like it. It's what it sounds like to me. Wow. Okay, let me see. I have a lot of things I wanted to cover. Oh, one thing I was interested in, for decisions made, so let's say business decisions made in the mafia, does that decision come from the top down, or is there a negotiation people take part of?
Well, it depends on what we're talking about. In business, the way fortunate in that I knew how to use that life to benefit me in business and had a lot of success as a result, both legally and illegally. Um, the biggest thing I did, I devised a scheme to defraud the government out of tax on every gallon of gasoline. It would be nice if I was in that business right now. I'd be making more money than I made back then, but because the taxes are a lot more. But it was my scheme, so to speak. So, but anytime you do something in that life, you have to put it on record with your boss. So he has to know what you're doing. And so, when I came across this deal, I brought it into my boss at the time and I told him what I was doing. And, I paid up to the family also. I gave them, part of the proceeds of what I was earning. And you have to do that. That's how the family survives. But when I had a legal business, which I had many, I had two car agencies, I had a film production company, some restaurants,
Hmm.
that was mine. I didn't have to give anything to anybody with that. So, um, but the boss and the hierarchy of the family, they do get involved in a lot of the business dealings because they need to know what's going on.
And how risky it is, I suppose.
Yeah, and sometimes they'll say, no, we don't want you involved in that. Like, in our life, during my era in that life, we were not allowed to deal with drugs. Couldn't deal with drugs. Drugs was off limits. I know guys that got in serious trouble for dealing with drugs, if they violated the rules. And that comes from the top, and you can't violate no discussion.
Yeah, that makes sense. How much money were you making from this, I guess, gas scam, you could call it?
Well, yes, I ran that operation for about 8 years. I had the Russian mobsters from Brighton Beach in Brooklyn that were working with me. They had a little gas
Wow.
operation. And yeah, and we were very close. And over a period of 8 years, we were selling a 500,000,000 gallons of gas a month, and we were taking down 30, 40 cents a gallon. We were bringing in between $8 and $10 million a week at that time.
And when was that?
So, that's what the operation that's what the operation was grossing back then.
Wow. What year was that?
This was from about 79 through 85.
Okay, wow. That is a lot of money. And so how much, and let me know if I'm asking anything I shouldn't be asking, but how much of that did you keep?
Well, I mean, there was $1.5 million, $2 million a week that was coming into my pocket.
Wow.
I had to pay up. Yeah, my boss, the family was getting about $2 million a week also, because we didn't have a lot of expenses, quite honestly. We just the way we ran the operation. I mean, I had my own jet plane at that time. I had a helicopter. I had three houses in three different states in the country. So I mean, we had all the little bells and whistles that a little bit more comfortable. But I was putting a lot of money away, no question, at that
Wow.
time.
I didn't realize that you could have kind of different mafia groups work together. I'm not that I know anything about this topic, but you said you worked with a Russian mafia. Is that common for different, I guess, groups to work together?
I mean, you can. I mean, we oftentimes worked with a group of Irish mob guys called the Westies. They were in Manhattan. They were based in Manhattan. We worked with them at times. The Russian mob, not many people work with them, but I happen to get along with them. And we had a very good relationship for a number of years. But it's not really common, but it does happen. It depends upon the situation.
Do you know anything about how it's structured now? Like, is the mafia still, I guess, as powerful as it was back then now, and just not talked about as much?
It's a lot of people say that it was John Gotti that destroyed the mob because he was so flashy and outspoken, and people like to point fingers in different ways, but what destroyed the mob was the RICO Act, the racketeering laws. We didn't understand it. We didn't keep up with it, and it gave the government such a and it devastated my former life. Throughout the mid '80s. And you got to give Giuliani credit for that because he was the first one that used the racketeering laws effectively, and he set the pace. And so he put so many guys away. He took away so much power that we had through the unions.
Hmm.
He stripped us of all of that, and he made so many people turn informant. And as a result, it's not as powerful today, not nearly as powerful as it was during my era, but it's still there. It's not going away. It still exists. The same structure is in place. I think guys have gotten smart and they're a lot more low key. You don't see the John Gottis anymore out there and flashy because you can't last in that life when you're like that. But it's not going away in my lifetime. I can tell you that.
If you're listening to this, you are probably some of the most well-informed and least paranoid people on the planet. But are you too nonchalant about your safety? What about your data? Do you have the same mindset when it comes to keeping your internet connection secure? It's not paranoia if everyone's really out to get you. The main thing about using a VPN is if you're downloading content and you don't want to be caught, you don't have to be paranoid that you'll go to jail because of some archaic law when doing so. Just use NordVPN. Your internet service provider also can apparently sell your data to advertisers for a profit, all while forfeiting the idea that people like you have a right to own their online information. You can defend your online privacy by grabbing your NordVPN deal today over at nordvpn.com/TMPP, or use promo code TMPP for 61% off their premium plan and their free anti-malware feature, all with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee. Yeah, and I suppose, I mean, I don't know what the effects of the last couple of years have done, but I know just the general public has less trust in the government. So I would assume, the more restrictive of a society, the more likely people are to do things illegally, especially if you get forced into doing things that you think are reasonable and then they turn illegal. That'd make the line a little blurry.
Well, it's funny, Mikhaila. I speak in church quite a bit, and there were some times when I'll make this statement and the pastor cringes, and I said, listen, I have no moral issue. I'm being very honest. I have no moral issue with stealing tax money from the government, because I believe I can do a lot better with it than they do. They steal our money, as far as I'm concerned, and waste it on wasteful things and enrich themselves. I said, but I won't do it because I'm not going to go back to jail, and I'm not going to, sin in that regard. Whether it is a sin or not, I really don't know. But and the pastor cringes, but people in the church clap for me. They stand up and they give me an ovation when they say that. That's how much distrust they have in the government today. It's evident.
Yeah.
You couldn't have said that. You couldn't have said that 30, 40 years ago. People would look at you like you said something wrong, but now they applaud you for saying that.
Yeah, it's a pretty strange time. When I first met my husband, he's kind of what turned me to the Christian faith as well, and he's very Christian, and I was being skeptical, and he's a pretty disagreeable, skeptical person, but I was like, oh yeah, I don't really trust, people are just people, right? So you put people in positions of power, like doctors say, or people in the government, but they're still just people. So it was like, I don't trust. I would say if someone's in a position of authority, I'm less likely to trust them for whatever reason. And so when we first met, we kind of had discussions about who was trustworthy and who isn't trustworthy. And I was like, I don't trust the government right now. I don't really trust the medical system. I don't really trust the government. And anyway, he's come around. But I think that is a change in the recent years. Like you said, 30 years ago, things would probably have been different, significantly different. It's gotten bad in the last 5 years, really.
Yes, absolutely. It's, I don't, you don't want to get me started on that. I mean, I just wrote a book called A Mafia Democracy. Mikhaila, it's amazing how mob-like our government is acting in so many different ways. And since I still have that mentality and I've had that experience, I see how Machiavellian our government is being, and it's frightful. It really is. It's scary. And the government overreach and the things that are happening now, I'm really concerned about the future of our country. I really am. This is not the America that I grew up in or that my family believed in. When I said not my dad, but everybody else. But, it's frightening. It really is what I see going on here on a daily basis.
Yeah. I agree. I just did an episode with my dad and this guy named Vivek Ramaswamy, who wrote a book called Woke Inc. And we talked about ESGs. I don't know if you know about ESGs, you might, but it stands for Environment Social Governance Scores. And so CEOs of major corporations, some of the really big ones like BlackRock, have got together and they decided that the companies under them should have ESG scores. So they're rating these capitalist companies on how well they do supporting the environment or how well they do supporting social causes, right? And it kind of undermines the entire system that America was built in, just capitalism, because you can trust a CEO to increase the wealth of their company, right? And increase the amount of money their shareholders have and be greedy in that way. But when they start implementing policies that affect the environment, things like that, the country starts getting a little bit strange. We're releasing that episode today, but it's something worth looking into, ESGs, because I think a lot of the political unrest that's caused by a number of reasons right now is also caused by this kind of top-down implementation of ESGs in these giant corporations. ESGs. I'll send you a link on. I think you should know about them.
I'd love to see that. I'd love to see it, really.
Yeah. Okay. One question. So if you've kind of, I mean, you grew up in this, but if you've kind of crossed the line and decided, okay, the government taking tax money isn't good, and if the government's after your family and police are after your family, how do you define what's morally acceptable and what's not morally acceptable if it's not by what the law says?
Well, that's an age-old question. And somebody had said to me one time, Michael, you have no moral issue with paying taxes, but Jesus said, render therefore to Caesar what are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And I said, yes, he did say that. I said, but understand the environment in which Jesus said that. He didn't believe that the Romans should be overtaxing the people. He wasn't saying that's a good thing and that's what the government should be doing. But, they tried to put Jesus on the spot when he was in a crowd of people. And if he would have said, no, don't pay the government, or the Romans, he would have put people in jeopardy. So what he said is, listen, you got to obey the law. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's not sinful what the Romans are doing, taking advantage of you. But he outsmarted the people that asked him that question. So do I think it's morally wrong to, want to hide money from the government that I think that they're misusing and that they're using against us? I don't think it's sinful. I don't. And I'm not trying to justify it, because I'm not doing that now. And I'm not justifying what I did back then, because when I did it back then, I was a criminal. I did it with criminal intent. I wasn't being, Robin Hood, or I wasn't trying to share it with others, and your intent means everything. So back then it was criminal intent. I was enriching myself and the people around us. But so at that point it was sinful. But if I were to do that now and say, the government is overreaching, I know for a fact that this is wasteful money. I know that for a fact that they're taking advantage of people that are trying to put food on their table and pay their mortgage and so on and so forth. So I don't believe it would be sinful if I had the right intent in what I was going to do with that money.
Yeah.
So
judge the heart.
I don't know if I explain that right. But yeah. Kale, I mean, I wrote this chapter in my book that if you see why is it that government workers, government elected officials go in with blue collar income and lives and come out as multimillionaires? Because they use the system to enrich themselves. And that's not what this system was built upon. They're supposed to be public servants doing the work for the people that put them in office. But, you get people like Nancy Pelosi, I'm sorry, that, she's enriched herself to the tune of several $100 million using her position to enrich herself. To me, that's sinful. That's not what this system is set up for. So I look at it as I'm exposing this. I'm letting people know this is what's happening. Now, I don't want an insurrection. I don't want a revolution. What I'm saying is the way you make people pay for this, you hold them accountable at the voting booths. And I'll tell you this in your own life. If your husband will use that, or my wife lies to me once, well, okay. They lie to me a second time. You start to get a little bit more irritated. A third time, a fourth time, it becomes a pattern. You're not going to accept it. You're not going to accept it. It's not a healthy relationship. Well, we put our people in office. They lie to us constantly, make promises they don't keep, reverse themselves, And we look, no, it's not politics. That's lying. And we shouldn't allow them to do that. So what do? You vote them out. We still do have power in numbers here in this country. And that's the whole reason I wrote the book, the whole reason I'm so irritated with this. And people say, well, Michael, why are you so in tune with this now? It's not me. I'm 71 years old. There's not much more they can do to me or about me, or that's not, I'm here now. But I have 7 children. I have grandchildren, and I'm concerned about the future of this country for their benefit. And so I'm trying to sound the alarm, so to speak, to let people understand what's really going on. And some of the things that I'm seeing now they're so scary. I mean, the way the government is using the FBI as a tool for them.
Yeah,
The FBI is
that's
supposed
scary.
it's supposed to be an independent agency. That's very, very, very scary. Now, I will tell you this. I know from past experience that the FBI overreaches, that they break the law to go after criminals. But maybe, Mikhaila, you can justify it because mobsters are criminals. So, hey, you overreach a little bit against the mobster, nobody's going to get upset. But when you start doing that against legitimate people, because remember, you give the government, they'll take a yard. They'll take as much as they possibly can. And if they overreach against the criminal, they'll overreach against the legitimate person too. So you have to keep them in check. That's what democracy, that's what a republic is all about. We have to keep them in check. And unfortunately, I don't see that happening now. And it's very scary to me.
It's also hard to see who's in charge right now. Like, who's making the decisions behind what's
Yes.
going on. That scares me. It's like you don't even know what's happening.
Well, it should scare you. And most people, and you don't blame them, they're oblivious to this. They don't understand. They're being fed information and they take it for what it's worth. But, middle America, most people in this country, what are they concerned about? Paying their mortgage, putting food on the table. They're not paying attention to the things that are going on, and they don't see it. They don't understand it. So they can't blame them. Every once in a while, I'll watch one of these shows where they go out into the street and they ask people about things that are going on in government today. And some of the responses, Mikhaila, I don't know if you ever, people are so going on in our country, our world. And they're voting. They're voting.
I know. Yeah.
You
Well,
know, it's
it's a lot
I don't
easier
know.
I think it's a lot easier to operate in your life if you just take some things for granted, right? Now, it's not easier if the things that you trust start failing around you. But if you walk around, like before I kind of started questioning everything, I had trust in the government doing what a government is supposed to do and the medical system doing what a medical system is supposed to do. And then you don't have to think about those things. You can just say, okay, those work how they're supposed to work, and you can focus on other issues in your life. But if you suddenly start thinking about all those things, it's like, oh, what exactly is the government and what is it doing right now and who's in charge and what are its goals and how is that changing the shape of the country? And then how are different policies being implemented? How are those affecting me? Like that complicates things to a level that makes it a lot harder to think, well, I need to go to work today and just make enough money so I can eat. It's like that's on a different level.
Exactly. No, you nailed it. You're absolutely right. It's so much information to process. It's very difficult. It's very difficult for people to focus on what search and say what's really happening here. They don't want to deal with it, and I get it. They put people in office. They expect them to do the right thing, and that's it. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen that way.
Not to necessarily get into a biblical discussion, but that verse you talked about that's repay to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. I also wonder what he was talking about when he said repay to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, right? Because you could say repay to the government what belongs to the government. That's not necessarily what the government is telling you belongs to them.
Well, people don't understand. We're taxed on everything. I mean, the food you eat, the clothes you buy, the car you drive, the road you drive on. the airline you travel on, everything is taxed. We sometimes forget that. It's not only personal income tax or corporate tax. Everything is taxed. There's nothing that's tax-free in our daily lives. So does the government have the right to tax everything that we live by? I guess they do. They're the government. They're in power. They can do it. They make the laws. Doesn't mean it's morally that, especially when the money is being squandered.
Yeah, yeah,
Now, if
yeah.
the money is being used for the right things, well, okay, we have to support America, this country. We have to support it. If you look at the government waste, if people really focused on it and understood where their money was going, they'd be outraged. Outraged. I have a chapter in my book that talks all about this. They'd be outraged. The billions and billions of dollars of wasteful spending that's just done for the benefit of the people in office. It's mind-boggling.
So, what made you decide specifically to write about what you wrote about?
It got to a point where I said, I have a platform, I have a fairly big following, and I said, it's not right for me just to sit on this. I have to make people aware of it. And again, it's really for the future of my children and grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
That this country is, I think we're on a very bad course. And I don't know if it's reversible at this point. I really don't. Biblically, are we getting near the end times? There's a lot of, people always say that, and it could be another 1,000 years. Who knows? I mean, we don't know. But it certainly looks like things are falling apart here in America. I mean, the whole mentality is changing. People are now, our young people are talking about socialism in a good way. Socialism has real socialism hasn't worked, credibly anywhere in the world, but we're talking about that here in the United States. And they're advocating it. I mean, we have politicians now that are avowed socialists, and people
Yeah.
are supporting them. So, I mean, it's scary stuff for me, and I just figured, hey, you know what? I have a platform. It's time for me to sound the alarm, and that's what I did.
Do you think so I've talked to my dad about this too, and I was like, things look pretty bad from my point of view at the moment. And I don't know if it's going to get worse, or if people are going to get sick of it and in maybe a decade things will turn around, because it's gotten worse so quickly that maybe society needs time to catch up to kind of realize what's going on to fight back against it. But I asked him if it was actually worse than what he's experienced, because he's been alive he was very concerned about the Cold War, right? And that was definitely, America entered danger zone during that period of time. But do you think from your experience throughout life, politically, this is the most unstable you've seen America?
Oh, absolutely. We said, there was a time when the Democratic and Republican parties were not too far apart. They really weren't. They had some different things, different ideologies in a little way, but you can have peaceful conversation. You can have intelligent dialogue. Democrats and Republicans got along. I've never seen this country so divided. I've never seen such vitriol, such hatred, such venom coming out from one side against the other. And it's starting at the top. Listen, I was a supporter of Donald Trump because I supported his policies. And I took some heat from that. People say, well, you're a Trump lover. I said, no, I'm just not a Trump hater. I don't have the syndrome. I supported his policies because I thought they were good for America. I said, listen, I don't invite him to my house for dinner. He's not going to date one of my daughters. Personally, we don't have to get along. But his policies for America, I thought were good. If he was a Democrat, I would support him also because of his policies. But you can't even talk like that anymore because people are so blinded by hatred. And, what I disagreed with Trump is I thought he was very divisive. Now, a lot of people say, well, he had to fight back. Well, he could have fought back a little bit more diplomatically because it starts from the top. You know, when people see this division on the top, it bleeds down into have these two forces that are just at odds with each other all the time. And I'm seeing that now worse than ever. Worse than ever. There's so much division in this country. Families are fighting with one another over their political beliefs. It's just terrible. And I think we're on a course. It would take somebody with a very, very strong personality and real leadership qualities, somebody that has to be charismatic, that has to be endearing, has to be just that special kind of person to try to and really believe in bringing this country together again. And I just
Yeah.
don't know if that person exists.
Yeah, that's going to be a difficult person to find. Even just somebody who wants to bring the country together and doesn't think that one part of the country are full of demons. Even just finding that person,
Yeah.
because yeah, yeah, that's going to be tricky. Okay, going back to your kind of experience in the mob, did you learn anything that you've passed on to your kids that you found helpful from living that life?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you know, a lot of things. Listen, in that life, you have to have discipline. Very, very important. You got to learn how to respect and obey authority. It's kind of it's almost like militaristic in that way, you know.
Mm.
And I think, you know, if I was president, I would have every 18-year-old join the military for 2 years. I think it's great learning. I think it's good for our young men, especially, you know, to learn discipline and authority and structure in their lives. So, you know, I've also learned in that life that you become a good listener. You don't shoot your mouth off. You're very slow to speak, very quick to listen. And I learned in that life that you should be the last one to condemn somebody because, you know, that life, Mikhaila, is like a wheel and things turn around. The person that you condemn one day that's on the bottom might be your boss on the top, and they don't forget that. So you're always the last one to condemn people, you know, to try to reason things out first so that when your turn comes, you're not the first one that's condemned. So, you know, and these are qualities that I think are important in life. They're life skills that I think are very important. You know, I used to tell people, especially in business, you know, there's times when you could be the smartest person in the room and you don't want anybody to know that. So what do? You keep your mouth shut and you listen, you let people talk and so on and so forth. And you learn a lot by that. You learn a lot about the person you're sitting with and the deal and the negotiation. There's other times when you're not the smartest person in the room and people don't know that because you're not speaking out of turn. They're wondering what you're thinking. And meanwhile, they're talking and you're getting all the, you can become educated during that meeting. So, you know, I've taught my kids that and for the most part, they've listened. I mean, I have 5 daughters. So my daughters they're all very independent and you know, they're like their mom. They certainly think for themselves and they're tough. I got to tell you, they're not pushovers. They're very tough.
That
I
doesn't
hopefully
surprise
I
me.
instilled a little bit of that.
Yeah, that doesn't
Yes.
surprise me. That's very cool. Um, did you have kind of an us and them mentality? You said that you were in pre-med and that you stopped doing pre-med,
Yes.
right? So did you have a group of friends that were kind of completely outside of this, and then you ended up getting more involved? Is that kind of what happened? Getting more involved back in the mob?
No, I mean, not, yeah, not really. I mean, you know, I was an athlete in school. I mean, I played sports. I even though I knew about the life and I was part of the life, and I always had my dad's friends around, you know, at the house and all of that. I was just fairly normal in my relationships going to school. You know, I had friends that way, and of course they knew who I was because my dad had so much publicity. So at times, you know, I got into scuffles with kids when they'd make remarks about my dad. Oh, you got a mafia dad, and you know, I would fight. But and then a lot of kids they off your dad. You know how kids are. You never know what side they're gonna pick with you. But so I was fairly normal. Things really started when my dad went to prison, and then I was really immersed in the life when Joe Colombo, who was the boss of the Colombo family, kind of took me under his wing. And then I was around the guys all the time. And then it meant something to me because I had a goal. I wanted to help my dad. So I started to pay more attention, to listen, and to get more involved.
Yep. That makes sense. That makes sense. I think I've done a lot, not to like compare us at all, but a lot of the way that I've structured my life was to help my dad for whatever reason. And I guess, I mean, lots of people know who he is now, so I guess he's an incredible person, but I always had like a deep respect for my dad. So a lot of what I've done, honestly, probably since I got healthy, because when I was sick, that was basically what I did, was just being sick. But when I got healthy, I think I've spent a lot of my time helping my dad for probably really 7 years, like 7 years basically full time. It's just been, how do I make this person's life easier, because he went through like health struggles and like fame and controversy, and it was like, how do I make his life easier? Luckily, things seem to be set up. I've like structured things now enough that it takes up less time, but it's been an interesting experience. It's an interesting experience. Do you have siblings?
Yeah, I was one of 7 also. Unfortunately, 2 of my younger sisters passed away, so there's 5 of us left now.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, so, and we're fairly close. I mean, they all live back east, but we stay in touch.
Is there?
It's funny because it was my wife. It was my wife that really turned me on to Dad. She was always fascinated by. She listened to your dad quite a bit, and she was very fascinated by his views on a lot of things. And she said, "Mike, you got to listen to Jordan," and it was fascinating, really, because she still listens to your dad a lot.
No, we've got to get you guys to have a conversation. I told him, we were on the phone before I started the podcast, and I was like, oh, I'm talking to this guy. He was in the mob. He turned his life around. It should be a really interesting conversation. It's like, you guys should talk. That'd be good. I think people would really enjoy that. That'd be a good conversation.
Yeah, it would be nice one day.
One thing I wanted to know, are there women that are in the more like business area of the mob, or is it really focused around men in the families?
In America, in Cosa Nostra, which means this thing of ours, in Cosa Nostra in America, women don't play a role in that life at all. Unless for some reason, one of the guys was bringing their girlfriend or their wife involvement in some way, but they have no authority. They have no place in that life at all. It's different in Italy, in the Mafia in Italy. As a matter of fact, I just did a video on my YouTube channel last week about a woman who actually was kind of the boss of one of the Mafia families in Naples, which is my hometown, my parents' hometown. So in Italy, yes, in the Mafia. Here in America, no, not till this point, not through for the last 100 years. Now, whether that changes or not, I don't know, but I doubt it will.
And is that kind of the same? 'Cause you said you worked with Irish and Russians. Did they kind of have a similar setup, not that it was 100% men? From
to the best of my knowledge, it's 100% men. Yeah, I mean, they did. These other groups didn't have the structure that we had. They didn't have the formality that we had. With the Russian mob, I don't believe they take an oath. I don't believe they have ranks. They're more clannish.
Yeah.
It's more family, actual family, blood relatives that are involved. And it seems that the person that's making the most money calls the shots. So they didn't have the structure that we had. The Irish people the same way. They were just, gangsters, without a lot of structure.
Interesting.
And no women. I didn't notice any women at all.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not that surprised by that. Was it stressful then it must have been. Like, I can't imagine having to deal with life and then also having to deal with the fact that you're operating illegally, so you have to worry about the government on top of everything. Is it stressful for families associated, or was it stressful for families associated, women associated with the Mafia?
Yeah, Mikhaila, one thing I don't do, I never glorify the life because it doesn't deserve to be glorified. But what I've always said is that the mob life, the gang life, they're evil lifestyles. And the reason I say that, I'm not calling the guys evil because I was one of them, and everybody's not evil. Now, there was some bad people, but that's true in every walk of life. But the lifestyle is evil because I don't know any family of any made member of that life that hasn't been totally destroyed, and
Oh.
including my own. Now, not my wife and kids, fortunately, but my mother spent 33 years without her husband while my dad was incarcerated, and in the last years of her life, she died in 2012. I can only describe her relationship with my dad as very ugly because she blamed him for everything that went wrong in her. And what went wrong? Well, I had a sister that died of an overdose of drugs at the age of 27, my baby sister. My brother was a drug addict for 25 years. He got himself in trouble. He was a street kid, ended up cooperating with the government and actually cooperated against my father and put my father back in
Oh.
prison when he was out on parole. A son against the father. Another younger sister, she was mentally unstable. She died at the age of 42 of cancer. And so the whole family was devastated. And any lifestyle that causes that for a family is an evil lifestyle. And that's how it is across the board. So it's what I try to explain to these young kids today. I said, you're not only doing this to yourself, you're destroying your family. This is very destructive. It's a bad lifestyle. And and so yes, it was very, very stressful. My mother was constantly under stress. My sisters that didn't accept it the way I was able to accept it. A little different sometimes with a girl and a boy. And so it's very hard. It's a very hard life to navigate. And I guess people get it. They look at it. They're from the outside looking in. But the unfortunate thing, Mikhail, with a lot of young men, they're very, very, very impressioned by the life. Meaning, I go into, to these gangbangers, and they'll look at me and they say, Mike, come on, you had the cars, you had the women, you had the power, the prestige, you had a jet plane. They'll watch the movie Goodfellas. I don't know if you ever saw that, and they'll point out all the good things, and I'll have to ask them. I said, well, wait a second, didn't you watch the second half of the movie, the end of the movie? Who died, who went to prison, who lost everything, who got killed? You didn't see that part. They don't see that. They only see the first part. Who's got all the money they don't look at the devastating end of the story. So that's why I discourage people all the time. And I've worked very hard with young people to try to discourage them from that life and let them get their lives turned around. Obviously, for me, I don't know how you turn your life around without a belief in God. I don't know how you do that. But so I try to steer people that way. But it's a tough, very, very tough life. It really is.
I don't know how you would turn your life around without a belief in God either. I mean, before, so I was never an atheist. I was never a full blown atheist, but I never, I think I was so sick too. Like, I was so sick with joint replacements and on so much medication that I was like, if God exists, like, I hate him. Like, this is awful. And I can remember, I think when I was 17 and I was suicidal with like pain. And I can remember thinking, there's definitely no God. And if there is one, he's not good, right? Um, but now after I've been through all of that and I'm thank God I'm better. I can also see what that did for me, right? Which is something that you can't see when you're in it. And so I don't think of it the same way. But I think I would have a hard time with some of the things I struggled with without a belief in God. Part of it, I think, too, taking care of myself. Like, I think one of the things I struggled with is I'm more inclined to take care of people around me than to take care of myself. And I think a belief in God has probably helped that for whatever reason. Because it's kind of, I guess, sinful in a way to not take care of yourself, right? And I don't think I would have viewed it like that without a belief in God. It's like, no, I have to, otherwise I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah. I get it. You know, it's the age-old question. You know, why do bad things happen to good people? And when you don't have an understanding biblically what God is all about, it's a very hard concept to understand. Well, we have a loving and gracious God, and why do these bad things happen to good people? And unless you have a real, understanding of Scripture and a thorough understanding, it's a very hard question to answer. But as Christians, when you understand your faith, it becomes a lot more clear.
You said that when you were in prison, you read hundreds of books on different faiths, which is very interesting. So, what was it about Christianity that made you decide that was, I guess, the most logical explanation for reality?
Well, I think it goes back to Jesus. One of the things that's very, um, and first of all, you have to believe the authenticity of Scripture. So I went back and did a study. I had my wife send me books on authenticating Scripture in the Bible. And there's so much evidence to prove that the Bible is really authentic. So once I got past that and I said, okay, I can trust this, then I started to look, and I'm more of a New Testament guy. And what was convincing to me is the attitude of the apostles after Jesus died, and to see how, it would have been a lot more normal for them to run and hide because their leader was gone and was killed in a violent way. I mean, this is somebody that they had all the faith in the world, and then they see him destroyed in front of them. And so what happens? They leave. That would have been normal. But then after Jesus resurrected, visited with them, they became like lions. They became strong. They were willing to go to their death and stand up for Jesus. They wouldn't even deny him at that. That was very powerful evidence to me. And so what I did was I researched to try to convince myself one way or the other that this is real or it isn't real. And I can't get into all of it, but the research that I did convinced me that what happened to the apostles was real, that the history showed that this was a real happening. There really was a resurrection. The attitude and the actions of the apostles afterwards proved to me that there was a risen Jesus. And it was all of these things that combined. I always tell people, I don't suggest that you go and live in solitary for several years and do the research like I did to prove, Scripture. But for me, it was life-changing and life-saving because it became indelible. And, here's another thing, Mikhaila, I try to look at things very practically. So from the time I was 5 years old, my father drummed it into my head. Michael, you got to be a man's man. That's the standard in life you have to live up to. I heard it my whole life. When I got into the life, the same thing. We're men above men. We're men of honor. I heard that all the time. So when I started to study Jesus, I did things a little bit differently. I separated his manhood from his deity, and I really wanted to see what kind of man he was because I was so in tune with the qualities and characteristics of what a man's man should be. So when I studied Jesus of Nazareth, I was blown away by his character, his strength, his emotion. Everything about him to me was perfect. And I said, this is somebody you should emulate. So trying to be very practical about it, I said, okay, let's say I try to emulate Jesus of Nazareth throughout my life. Well, I'm going to be a better person. I'm going to be a better husband to my wife, a better father to my children. If I'm a boss, I'm going to treat my employees right. If I'm an employee, I'm going to give my boss an honest day's work. Everybody in the community, I'm going to be outgiving. I'm going to be wanting to help people. They're all going to benefit from me trying to emulate what I perceive to be the great man that ever walked the earth. And I'm going to benefit. And then I said, well, when I'm dead, if he's not the savior of the world, well, I'm dead anyway. So what did I have to lose? I had nothing to lose. So I came to the conclusion that emulating Jesus is a win-win situation for any man. And I actually teach that. It makes sense to men. You can't lose because if being the savior of the world and are accepting Christ, and asking for forgiveness. If we're wrong about that, well, then we're dead anyway. We didn't lose anything throughout our life, but everybody benefited from us being a better person. And but I do believe that he is the savior of the world. I believe it with all my heart. I'm not trying to justify it or convince myself otherwise. I'm not a perfect person in any way, but my faith is perfect because I believe this, and nothing can stand in the way of that at this point in time. I've come to the understanding of why bad things happen to good people. I get it all. My kids complain to me sometime, Mikhaila, Daddy, that's not fair. I said, really? What's not fair? What's not fair is this little kid that was born in Africa that has nothing to eat, no shoes on his feet, and that child did nothing but be born. That's all he did. So don't tell me what's not fair because you got it pretty good in your life. And I understand this, and it's helped me it just helped me throughout my life, having this point of view. And it's all because of my faith. It's all because of the research and the study I did and the impact that God has had on my life.
That was great. I think that's similar to what my dad believes, and I'm not entirely sure exactly where he is in his journey. I'm not it's hard to kind of get a read on that. But what I know he firmly believes is that if you act as if Jesus would have acted, then your life is better and the people's lives around you is better. And so that's what he tells people too, is that's the best way to live for sure. And everyone really who's familiar with Christianity kind of knows that. So that's very cool. Michael, if people are interested in learning more about you or finding you online, where should they go?
Well, my website is michaelfranzese.com. YouTube, just plug in Michael Franzese. I'm on all the social media platforms, under my own name. Usually it'll say official next to it, so they know it's me. My book, if they go on mafiademocracy.com, they'll get a free chapter. We give them a free chapter to see if they're interested, and then they can purchase it anywhere. On my website, we give them a signed copy of it. I'm all over the place, easy to find. But yeah, and hopefully people will tune in and they hear a little bit more.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you coming on. That was great. Very interesting.
Well, I appreciate you having me, Mikhaila, and I'm glad that things are going well, and I see you're really growing too. Your subs are really up there, so it's great to know. Really.
Yeah.
And I
know
you've been through a lot, and to see you come out, on the other side of it is just great. It's very rewarding. I've learned something, and I think you said something that kind of stuck with me. When you're focused on yourself, you got so many things going on, and you're trying to take care of yourself, and rightfully, it's like when you're in an airplane, and they say, if the oxygen comes down, put it first on yourself, and then you help everybody else. You got to help yourself first. But I have found, I really mean that, is that it's so much more rewarding to give of yourself than it is to receive. And one of the things that motivates me is that on a daily basis, between emails and social media messages, I get so many messages from people that have been inspired by my story or by things that I have to say and encouraged by it. And it's very motivating, and it keeps you going, and it's just a wonderful feeling. It makes you know that, hey, you're doing the right thing. And so you continue on. And I think you're inspiring a lot of people. I got great comments, wonderful comments when you were on my YouTube platform. People saying how courageous you were, and just wonderful
nice.
comments. So, yeah, you're inspiring a lot of people. My daughters were like, wow, and they don't listen to anything on my YouTube channel, but they listen to you, and it was I was very glad about that. So they'll probably listen to this also.
Oh, that's very cool. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I really think what you're doing is great too. I mean, having actual experience doing extremely serious things in a very manly way, right? Like it's harder to get more manly than the Mafia, right? For especially for people, I guess, who Well, just in general. And so having that experience and being in really scary situations and then talking about it honestly and what you've learned from it, and showing that you're like a family man, it's great. I think it's really good for people to see. So I'm going to try and see if I can get you to talk to my dad, because I'd like to watch that conversation. I think that would be good.
Yeah, that would be great. Maybe the three of us even, but it would be great.
Yeah. I usually just sit there quietly when he's involved. Like even the podcast I'm releasing today, it was like I was kind of just sitting there. I was like, I'll just listen. Which I'm totally fine with. Those are my favorites. So thank you again for coming on.
All right, Mikhaila. Thank you. God bless, and just keep doing what you're doing. Great.